Welcome to the Bettor Thinking Podcast. Today's guest, Ed Miller, author of The Logic of Sports Betting and Interception, shares fascinating insights about where the real edges exist in today's markets. If you've ever wondered whether same-game parlays are beatable, Ed breaks down exactly how sharp bettors exploit these products by understanding their underlying mechanics. He also reveals why live betting remains surprisingly soft and challenges the popular top-down betting approach that many professionals advocate. Ed's journey from Microsoft engineer to professional gambler spans multiple markets: poker during the moneymaker boom, daily fantasy sports, and now sports betting. His unique perspective as someone who's built sophisticated betting models offers a rare look behind the curtain at how these markets really work. Whether you're a recreational bettor or aspiring professional, you won't want to miss Ed's insights on finding genuine edges in today's betting landscape, including specific examples from his books that bettors are using to profit right now. Let's get started with Ed Miller. Ed Miller, how are you, sir? It's a pleasure to meet you.
Fantastic. How you doing? Thank you for having me on.
No, I appreciate you coming on. And you're out in Vegas, right? How long have you been out there?
A long time. Moved here 2003, so I guess 22 years.
Was your purpose of moving out there, was it to be a professional gambler?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was. I mean, I just finished college 2 years prior, and I had a job at Microsoft as a software engineer, and then that job kind of fell apart a little bit, and I was looking for the next thing, and I decided I was going to be a high school physics teacher, actually. But then I picked up online poker on the side and had a very good World Series in 2003 and said, screw it, let's move to Vegas.
Was 2000, was that the moneymaker year?
It was in fact the moneymaker year. Yeah.
So how did you do? You said you had a good year. Where'd you come in?
Yeah, I mean, I was just playing cash games, and
Oh, okay.
I was just a brand new 22-year-old fledgling poker player, and I made more than I would have made teaching physics for the year. Put it that way. I made more in whatever 5 weeks of playing cash games, and I said, well, let's maybe try that.
Was that online or was that in live games?
No, live. I just left my job, and it was in April that year, and I just left my job in March, and again, single dude. Then I said, well, I got nothing going on. Let's go to Vegas. So that's what I did.
Well, some of the best time to play cash games is during the World Series of Poker, certainly now that it's gotten so huge.
Is it? Yeah, I actually don't play poker anymore. I haven't played in probably 10 years, but it's I know the game's changed so much, since those days when I was playing full time. So
it has. Actually, that was something I wanted to talk to you about. Maybe we'll bring it up later, because there was such a revolution in poker, and that really was probably the beginning of it, right? That year, the 2003, that whole moneymaker thing, and the style of play. It was the old time sort of gamblers who were involved in poker, like the characters that we really fell in love with. The Doyle Brunson and Sammy Farhar went right down to the end there with moneymaker.
It's funny because I was actually sitting in the audience for that final table. Right, and so it was Moneymaker and Farhan, and Phil Hellmuth was outside the door hawking his book. I remember that,
of course.
And it was just, I mean, it was the least. It was in a little tiny conference room on the second floor of Binion's Horseshoe. There were, 40 seats there. Like, it was not a thing.
No,
it was the most underwhelming show on earth, and yet it, little did anyone know, I think, that it was about to become a massive thing.
That was I can't remember how many times I actually watched. I watched that a ton of times, as a lot of people did, and that was really the start. I mean, in the 90s, I used to record it on ESPN. There'd be about 150 total people in the whole tournament, and ESPN would put it on about 2:00 in the morning. And I'd record it with my other, and my degenerate friends.
When the poker's over, the Aussie rules football comes on.
Exactly. And but yeah, that changed everything. So you haven't really been playing, and obviously you got involved in DFS, which I could kind of relate to this because I still play DFS professionally. So you got involved there. I actually work with Run Pure Sports.
Okay.
And I've heard some of your story where you had a partner as well. I had a partner we started. Now I was sports betting before I got involved in DFS, and I was playing poker as well. You got involved in poker, then DFS, then sports betting, if I'm getting that correct.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I'm always late. Well, I wasn't late on poker, but I was late on DFS. I feel dumb because I knew about DFS like from the moment it launched, like in 2008. The first guy launched it was like right after the UIEGA. It was like a hack on the UIEGA was the original DFS game. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I was late to the game as well.
Yeah, the original it was called Fantasy Sports Live, I feel like was the name of the site. And the guy basically was like the UIE was the federal law they passed that basically made it illegal for banks to transfer online gaming transactions. But there was a specific carve out for fantasy sports in the law. It says the words fantasy sports in the law. So some guy again smarter than me was like, ding, ding, ding. Let me basically create, a poker. I mean, it was poker. It was a poker. They were poker sit and goes was the idea. Like the entire lobby and everything. It was just poker sit and go lobby from, top to bottom, except the game was, this fantasy sports game that I presumably came up with on a napkin.
Yeah, very well could have been. And
yeah. And I remember I was like, well, this is cute, but like the game itself is not a good game. That was my take. I was like, this is very clever, and then $1 billion of VC funding at FanDuel and DraftKings later, and here we are. So
and now they were on TV constantly. I guess it was like 2013, 14 when they were on TV constantly for the daily fantasy. Now you don't hear anything about the daily fantasy. Now it's all sports betting related, and they're on TV constantly, of course, for that. And now it's getting even bigger. Like I said, I'm still involved in the fantasy side of things, but they've sort of, all the perks that they were giving the top fantasy DFS players are all going to their sports betting guys now, especially the ones who are betting large amounts and are not very good at it. So they're getting all those perks that we were getting as DFS players back then.
Yes. Yep.
So I mean, so you make that move then to sports. So you play DFS for a while. You make the move to sports betting. I mean, you think sports betting is going to become the way of poker, where you said earlier, it's a much different game than it was in 2003 when you started playing. We've now got it's basically like the solver era now. We've got, everything's a different style of poker. Is that going to happen here in sports betting, or has it happened already?
It's a very interesting question. And I want to be clear. I don't know. And my ability to predict the course of sports betting has so far been a big fat wrong. So I don't know how seriously to take my opinion on this. So when the PASPA passed, which was, I don't know, 6 years ago now. I mean, not didn't pass it, unpassed the Supreme Court, whatever.
Right.
I'm
the
a
New
lawyer.
Jersey case. Yep.
Use legal terms like unpassed. So yeah, when that thing happened, I was like, well, basically I had the thesis you just had, which is, okay, I've seen this show before. A bunch of, the things get sharp and fast, and there's solvers, and there's, here comes the arms race. That was my take at the time. And at the time also, like, we happened to be in the position of, having overbuilt the military, so to speak, for the previous. We had, what I had been doing in sports betting was building, intricate, simulation models for U.S. sports when nobody in the global sports betting industry gave two craps about U.S. sports. So I was like, well, here we are. We're ahead of the game as far as the arms race goes. We've got what, in my opinion, at that point was obviously and clearly the best, most, to be clear, overbuilt. Like, this was not necessarily a prudent decision on our part to spend so much time and effort on building these models, but we had them. They were clearly the best, models of U.S. sports in the world at the time. And people say, how do you know? And it's like, well, I mean, it's like, how do you know you're the best poker player? Well, you play against everyone else and, you just know. Or you win and they lose and, you just know, right? So
what
that's
year
how we
is this? What year is this about when you're building
2017?
Okay.
2018?
Okay.
So whatever year the Supreme Court thing happened.
Okay.
So it was, 7 years ago. And yeah, and so, and so we said, well, why don't we get the head start on the arms race, make a business that's basically gonna supply, it's kind of like the underpants profit thing. It's like, we've got underpants, it's the profit, right? So that was kind of the idea, that, we'll build up what's, the arms for the coming arms race, and we'll have the best, sharpest models, and, and that's going to be valuable, right? That was kind of the thesis. And we spent a lot of time building on top of what we did. And we honestly crushed it. I mean, what we built was, I think, amazing. I think we had the best, to be clear, what we deployed was like a live betting product for all the major US sports. We had a little, office here in Vegas and a team of traders who were, very good at their jobs, and, and we put up, live lines for, NFL, college football, college basketball, NBA, baseball. We had a hockey that I'm less proud of. But, the 5 major sports here in the US, for sure. We had, in my opinion, by far the sharpest, best, up the most, awesome live betting product. And it just, business-wise, it was more complicated than I didn't understand kind of the business-wise. And then that was really the question you asked me was, where's this going? And I guess my answer is, well, I was already kind of wrong. Like, I already thought the arms race was coming, and it's not. If I look at the live betting products that exist today in the major retail books, I mean, it's not where I thought it was going to be 6 years ago. It's much softer. If you asked me 8 years ago, what are the live lights going to look like for NFL in 2014, I would say, well, they're going to be, unbeatable. That's not where we're at.
So are you finding success? Are you still finding success?
Oh,
with the live market?
it's the live lines are. I mean, they're very soft. I don't want to. I mean, I don't know how much detail I can get it. They're better. I mean, I've seen improvement. Particularly, improvement is on the data side. So, like, there's a whole ecosystem with how these live lines get made, right? Like, obviously, there needs to be, the live lines are a combination of 3 things, really. 4 things. Okay. The way live lines, this is a tangent you did not ask. But here we go.
I'm enthralled right now. I want to hear it.
So let's say we're trying to make live lines for an NFL game, right? So what goes into that? Well, one, there's a pregame market, right? Pregame market, people, all the nerds who do this, which is not a lot of them, honestly. I think people would be surprised. They think NFL, huge sport, ton of people, it's not a ton of people who actually like have huge influence on what the line is, right? So,
toughest sport, you think, at NFL the pregame line? Hey, Bettor Thinking listeners, are you ready to take your sports betting game to the next level? Don't miss out on the Sharp app, the ultimate tool for smarter betting decisions. With expert insights, real-time data, and strategies that give you the edge, the Sharp app is a game changer. And here's the kicker. For a limited time, you can get 35% off your pro subscription with the code THINKING35. Don't be the one left behind while everyone else is cashing in. Download the Sharp app today at sharp.app and start betting smarter.
I don't know soccer. Right. Soccer is a whole, this is, all the Europeans are like, hey, you don't know anything of this. All right, maybe you're right.
And that's a massively liquid market.
Yeah.
Soccer.
I mean, like Premier League and stuff. Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know anything about that. So I'm not speaking to that. I'm not speaking to tennis. There's a bunch of tennis nerds out there too. It's big in Europe and not really so here. But in the US, for sure, obviously it's the most liquid sport. It is the strongest pregame market, right? There's the most attention paid to it. So there's a pregame market. There's a bunch of nerds that do their work and try to get bets and whatever. That whole process works. And, we talked about, here's the plug time. We talk all about how that works in The Logic of Sports Betting, which is a book I wrote with Matt Davidow, my partner, 5 years ago. So anyway, there's a pregame market. Okay. There is there's a model. So basically you have to have some kind of software that you've written that says, okay, that can turn information, predominantly the pregame market, but possibly other information, and a game state, right? okay, the Chiefs are up 17-3. There's 3 minutes and 42 seconds left. The Raiders have the ball on the 42-yard, whatever, right? Like the actual game state. So to combine that pregame information plus the current game state into betting lines, right? That's a math problem, right? The software does that, right? So you need to have a model, right? You need to have a trader, right? So the trader's job is to basically say, okay, well, was in the pregame market, but things have changed, right? We've learned new things since the pregame thing happened. What the new things could be you name it, right? There was a game early this year where it was the Commanders Giants game before we really knew where those two teams were headed.
Yeah.
And it was like week 2, I think. The first play of the game, the opening kickoff, Graham Gano, there was a long run back, and Graham Gano managed to get himself injured trying to make a tackle, right? He was out for the game. I mean, that, it turns out, is a very significant piece of information that was obviously could not be in any pregame line and has an impact on every betting line you make from thereafter, right? And quarterback injuries are huge to you, obviously. But even other things like you can look at game scripts. Oh, I thought this team was going to run more. Now they're passing. Well, what does that say about the total? Like there's just a million things that, you can learn from watching the game. A million things you could think you learned you're wrong about also when you watch the game too. So there's an art to it. There's a big art to it. So there's a trader. It's a human being who has to be in there and try to interpret that information. People say, oh, the industry wants to automate that out, by the way. Like the sports book industrial complex. Once all those people, they don't want to pay those salaries. They don't want those people. They view that as old technology, and they want AI is gonna do that for us. Okay.
So you're saying from the sports book standpoint, they're just letting they don't have a human being updating these lines.
They do
Okay.
today. So they don't want that tomorrow.
Got it.
They want if you go to their doorstep and you say AI technology trading, we will replace your traders, they will listen to you. This is my point.
Yes.
And yeah. Okay. So there's that, and then there's a market during the game too. There's people who bet on this stuff, right? And so there's feedback from the people who are betting about how good a job you're doing in the other 3 parts, right? Okay. So the art to making the live line is basically combining those four things in an intelligent way throughout the game, right? And it's hard. It's very hard. Football is a complicated sport. The model itself is very hard. I mean, that's what I have done for the last 9 years, is build those models. It's hard. I mean, you see people argue about, what's the win probability? Should they go for the field goal? All that stuff it's hard. People come to different answers. People who build their models in different ways get different answers. I thought they should have kicked the field goal here. Well, I thought they shouldn't have. Well, here's my answer. And they, and then everybody calls everyone an idiot, and then they move on to the next game. And,
I'm sorry to cut you, but it's funny you say that, because when you hear during the broadcast, as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about that, where it kind of ties into the analytics of the decision making in the games for the coaches.
100%. It's the same.
It's the same concept. Or it's the same exact concept. And I've always thought. Now, I have not been inside an NFL team's building. I feel like, and maybe you would understand this better than I would. I feel like sometimes they're misinterpreting the data, or they're not using it properly in all scenarios. I've seen them, maybe baseball as well, and you've done some baseball, where maybe they just strictly rely on the numbers and they're not taking as much into account what you're talking about, which is maybe some of the variables that may change during the course of a game. I could be totally wrong. It's just the way I see it sometimes.
So there's 32 teams. They do it 32 different ways. That's the first problem. So everybody does it a little different. I would say in general, and again, I'm talking not about any specific team or even any specific sport, but in general, there's a thing that people do with data analytics where they anchor. I would say they anchor. They get their own pet idea, right? They analyze the data one way, and then they get anchored to that idea. And you see this with the third-party analytics people too, where I'm going to grade this, or I have this pet metric, right? I came up with some metric. It's points above expectation minus yards after catch area, whatever, right? Like that, all that stuff, which is, I'm not belittling any of that in any way, but what I see individual people do in the space is that they come up with that metric and then they kind of fall in love with it. And then it's the hammer and everything's in the
Right.
and they want to use that metric for everything. And, often, in my opinion, to the exclusion of common sense, right? Like they'll say, and then you end up with these QB lists where Gardner Minshew is like the best quarterback in the league or something.
Right.
Because my metric, says so. And it's like, well, obviously that's not the right answer. Like go back and, try again. And they're like, no, my metric, And yeah. And I would say, I think that happens everywhere is what
I think anyone who's done any sort of modeling can tend to fall in love with their model and not take I always say there's a science and an art to it, which is what you said with the trading. Right. And I think for those who have that mindset, the numbers and the data, they're going to focus maybe a little too much on the data and the model side of it, and maybe a little less on the art of it. And there's got to be a happy medium in there somewhere.
Well, the great thing about betting, and this is and I don't want to claim any, like I'm, there's a difference between people who bet on the results of their models and everyone else. And the reason is because you get it just shoved in your face when you get it wrong. I mean, when you and gotten it wrong plenty. I mean, I get it wrong plenty. This is betting on sports is an infinitely humbling experience. But that is my point, is that it's infinitely humbling. And so, when people disagree with you, they will shove it back in your face. They will bet against you. They're like, you want to bet on that? Okay, let's go. And then you're like, oh, wait a second. Maybe I don't want to bet on that. And with any other, if you're a journalist or you just have a company that does AI analytics, or you just have, or you're you work for a team. There's not that feedback. Nobody's pushing back and saying, oh, really? That's your answer, huh? You want to bet on that. And whereas that does happen when you bet, right? And it happens in real time. It also happens over the period of time, and it forces you to, I mean, if you want to win, at least it forces you to constantly reevaluate what you're doing and say, well, somebody didn't like that idea. Why didn't they like that idea? And that's, over the years has, I mean, I don't know how many changes and model tweaks and adjustments, made over the years based on that kind of feedback.
So how often are you making those adjustments?
All the time. I mean, there's model adjustments. There's adjustments like, hey, I think so. The model, to be clear, is like a rendering in software of how the sport works, is what I would say. It says, okay, teams that are up this amount tend to play this way, and teams that are down this amount tend to play that way. They tend to go for it on fourth year and not there, all that stuff, right? So it's just it's kind of a rendering of how the game in software of how the game plays, right? Well, the game's constantly changing. So you have to change your model every time they change the way they play the game. Otherwise, you're not doing your job. And then sometimes you make assumptions or you put something in your model, and there's a great example that I'm not going to give because it's not public information yet.
Right. It was something that didn't work, though.
Yeah, I would love to give it because it's the perfect example. But it's just there's put it this way. There's sometimes conventional wisdom about the way a game works. The game example is, I'm not trying to tease the audience at all. I'm trying to figure out a way to make the point without, it's like, you might say, okay, well, let's say in baseball, you have some model that says people who swing the bat harder hit the ball harder, right? And obviously that's true, but maybe that's not true. This is not it. I want to be clear. I'm not making any point about how hard people swing the bat.
Do not bet on this information.
Yeah. This is hypothetical. But like, so you have some assumption about how the game works. Okay, they swing harder, therefore the ball goes farther. And maybe that assumption is 80% right and 20% wrong. And whenever you have an assumption in your model that's 80% right and 20% wrong, well, that means you agree with the market 80% of the time, and 20% of the time you want to bet on it. And that's the 20% that you're wrong.
Right.
So which is the adverse selection problem. And so, yeah. And so, and that has come up before where there's been little edge cases of the sport that we kind of thought we understood and we had mostly right, but we got a little detail wrong. And we kept wanting to bet on the detail and then it's wrong. I mean, and that's how you figure out that you have a detail wrong.
When is it at the point where you're confident that you're going to start putting money on the model?
I mean, it's immediately.
Yeah. So you're not easing into it. You're not coming into the lower size.
Well, and again, I don't. But that's my answer is immediately. I don't. And I think in general people over. This is the thing I'll say. Okay, one is I think people overestimate the amount of work the other people are doing. Right, I do this too. Sometimes I think maybe a little too much credit to the market, so to speak. Personally, this is not to say that you should underestimate the market either, especially if you're new at this. But, I think sometimes people have, especially with like live lines, for instance, right? Like I just said, the live lines are not strong. They're not. Okay. And I think sometimes people might have this assumption that like, oh, NFL live lines, there must be like an office of, data science PhDs, like hired by, NASA to churn out the optimal NFL. And that's just not how it works. Like full stop. That's not how it works at all. So I think sometimes people have a misunderstanding of exactly where the lines come from, how strong they are. So the more you learn about the space, the more you understand what's on the other side of your bet. That's really the key. Okay. If you don't understand what's on the other side of your bet, you probably shouldn't be betting. That's a key point, right? Like, and what I mean is, okay, you see a line on a screen. Okay, I see, so-and-so's receiving yards over 34.5. Well, my question to you is, how is that line there? Why is it 34.5? Why is it sitting there for you to bet on draft dual fan kings?
Right.
Whatever, why is that offered to you? Who's offering it to you? Where does that number come from? Who's making that number? Right? How does that number get updated? Right? And the more you know about the answers to those questions, the more you could just go and bet. Because, if you understand what's on the other side and you're like, well, this is what's on my side. I did this work, right? This is okay. I do projections work and I do it this way. And I think I have this trick that I use that I think other people aren't using, maybe does it a little better. Or maybe I'm accounting for someone's injury a little better than everyone else or whatever, right? You know what you did, right? Betting is, someone else made a number. Well, how did they make that number? Maybe they are super smart. Maybe you're not. You probably should be betting in them then. But often they aren't super smart. Often it's, it's some company, right? The way, like the answer to the question of where does, so-and-so's over 63.5, whatever, is that there's some company that churns these things out, right? What's the quality of the work they do? Well, it's up and down, right? It's a company. It's just like any other company. Sometimes the work is good. Sometimes the work is not so good, right? They've got individual people ultimately doing work at the company, right? Maybe they're all at Christmas party this weekend. They're real people and they just do work and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good. And the only way to get a feel for it is to pay attention. This is what drives me crazy is people say, well, how do you know? And it's like, well, you have to do it. You have to engage with the prices. If you think you're going to win at, baseball betting and you don't want to look at any price, it's like you're not going to win, right? Like the way to win is to actually do it and look at the prices day after day after day after day. And then every once in a while you'll notice, wait a second, Every Thursday at 2 p.m., the guy goes out for a smoke break. There's no way to know that unless you actually do it, right? And that kind of stuff comes up all over the place in sports betting, like all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see different things. If you're following the markets closely, you'll see just different things with different books or different props at different books, maybe that they're not pricing certain props properly.
There's patterns.
Yep.
You'll pick up on patterns. You'll be like, this book is always late. They always put up some garbage first, and then you get 10 minutes to bet it, and then they pull it down and they copy. I mean, it's just craziness that happens with all this pricing. And again, literally, you just have to be there to see it day in and day out.
Now, what I'm getting from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's basically going to be real difficult to beat the market from a traditional handicapping standpoint. Like, what would be a traditional handicapper, someone who was doing this recreationally? What are their methods as opposed to someone doing what you do, which is very data heavy?
I mean, I don't understand how it is 2024. I don't understand what handicapping means without being data heavy.
Right.
I mean, to me, that's if you're going to try to handicap something, you're going to try to make a number, which is what handicapping is, right? Like if you're handicapping a football game, you're making a prediction about how likely each team is to win the game, how likely each team is to cover certain numbers in the game, and how likely they are to go over or under a certain total. Those are all numbers. I mean, to me, numbers, if you want to make numbers, it requires math and equations. And where does the input numbers, it comes from data. I mean, to me, handicapping is a purely data process. I don't even understand what it means to handicap sports in 2024 without heavily using data and math.
I think what I see, I mean, you're on Twitter and you see the Twitter touts and the whatnot. What drives me crazy is if you're not putting a value on that you think is too high, or too low, whatever it is, you've got to have a number on there that you're willing to you're not willing to bet anymore. So if you think that 38.5 number is a good number on the prop for an over, well, it's got to be at a certain price. Like, I don't know what price. So when people say, I love the over 38.5, I always say, well, what's the price? People will ask me all the time, they'll say, John, do you like so-and-so to rush for over 38.5 yards? And my answer, I would assume you would have a similar answer, is, well, what's the line on there? What's the vig that the book is taking?
So I do agree with that. Now I will say there is some, let's call it qualitative handicapping, that you can do on very soft markets, okay, generally. Or you have to be really damn sure that whatever you're qualitatively handicapping is not in the actual market, right? Those are the two options. So what do I mean by this? Okay, let's say you've got some guy who's, he's like, and again, I don't really bet player props. I'm so things I say about player props, someone might be like, Ed doesn't know what he's saying. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about a little bit. I'm not in the weeds every day looking at player prop numbers, to be clear. But your example was a player prop and they're popular. So let's say there's some backup running back and some book decides they have to have lines on 18 different skill position players every week because this is nothing with the industry, which we talk about. The other book, which I'll plug, which is called Interception, talks about how the industry works and sort of how the business people in this space think about all this stuff, which is very different from how bettors and all of us think and might surprise people. But anyway, so let's say they have 18 different, prop prices up on backup tight ends and third string running backs and stuff, right? So you can go back and you can say, okay, well, this guy was lined at 15.5 3 weeks ago and 16.5 2 weeks ago and 15.5 last week, and he's lined at 15.5 this week. But I happen to know that he's going to get way more snaps this week for whatever reason. So then he touts over 15.5. And the logic is, well, if 15.5 was the right answer the last 3 weeks, can't be the right answer this week, right? Mm-hmm. He's probably right. Over 15.5 is probably the right answer. Now, let's say that line moves to 27.5. Now your point completely is valid, which is, okay, well, now he's got no clue. Oh, he had a peak. He knew over 15.5 had to be good. Okay, he's right. But now that it moves significantly, now he's just floating in air, right? Now he's got no idea. Is over 27.5 good? I don't know. Maybe. still good. I don't know.
Well, even the
You
over
know.
15.5, at what price? Is it good at minus 200? Is it good at minus
It's
150?
the same question.
Same exact question.
Yeah. Same
Right,
question.
because of course, well, you could extrapolate minus 200 over 15.5 is whatever minus 110 would be in yardage. If you have the ability to do that. So yes, it would be the same, but that's I get questions all the time with people asking me certain props. And if you're not asking if you're not asking it with the value or with the juice in the question, then that's telling me that you're not thinking properly about betting on the whole.
So the qualitative bets and this is an important skill, but I feel like this skill is intuitive to people too. The qualitative bets that you make are, okay, well, this was the line without this angle that I have, right? The line is the same, but now I have an angle.
Right.
Right? Like,
you've got a comp to base it off
exactly.
of. Yeah.
If you have hard comps, then you can sort of qualitatively hand wave your way at successful handicapping. But as soon as that price starts moving, then you're floating in the air again until you have numbers.
One of the other big things I see is people overvalue very public information. Injury, an injury to the star quarterback, unless you know something about that injury that maybe others don't, or you're handicapping it in a different way,
Right.
or weather. Like if you take an over on a game and it's rain in the NFL, let's say it's a rainy game and the line drops down to 37, but you like the over. When I say, I like it, my numbers say this is over. They're overvaluing the weather, whatever it is. People almost everyone likes to bet unders in bad weather. And I said, well, they're not just giving the money away. Like everyone knows it's raining. Everyone knows it's snowing.
Right.
Everyone knows it's windy. Whatever the situation is. So don't you see some of the amateur bettors really just overvaluing what is already known and priced into the market?
Well, it's interesting because the instincts are right there, right? So the instincts are, hey, here's a thing that's different than normal. I want to bet on the thing that's like, I want to bet in the spots where things are weird, right? That's a great instinct. That's exactly the right instinct. Okay. So now your point is 100% fair, which is, yes, everyone else sees this too. The market is going to move the price to account for that. However, that's first order, right? So let's say we all know that the quarterback is injured and this other guy's going to start. Well, the question is, how good is that guy who's going to start, right? Maybe you're better at evaluate. The market is not awesome at that, just to be clear. The market does not have that nailed. How good is the third string quarterback that's coming in for
They get
Sam
it wrong
Houston State this week
all the time, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's very hard to know. There's not a lot of information, I mean, especially when you're looking at like college football or like, some of these guys are like literally true freshmen. They've literally never played a college football snap before. And here they are, they're going to be in a game and your job is to say how good they are. I mean, there's easily room to be better at that than the market. However, you have to understand that's what you're doing. You have to understand you're not betting on, the quarterback's injured. Well, you're right. Everyone knows that, right? Everyone knows this guy's probably worse, right? The question is how much worse.
Right.
Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's a little, and you can win on that distinction, but you have to understand that's the distinction. Again, you have to understand what you're betting on. You have to understand, okay, what is in this number? This number says, that the starting quarterback is injured and the backup is terrible. And I happen to know that this backup is not terrible, right? That's the level of thinking that you have to be on to try to win.
I think Green Bay would have been a good example this year. If you remember earlier in the year when Love went down, they just overvalued I'm forgetting now
they undervalued the backup.
Undervalued the backup and overvalued the Love's.
I mean, Love's good. I love the good
absolutely.
quarterback. They in my opinion, they just kind of valued the backup like he was,
because he was pretty bad in Tennessee and right.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, anyway, that is a good example. Yeah.
And that Tua might have been the opposite, where they could not even move the ball without Tua.
And this is the thing is you don't know. There's so much variance in those. And this is, again, in live games, right? These are spots in live games where, those early impressions on that guy can matter a ton, right? You could easily, this is absolutely a thing. Okay, now that game starts. Well, if the guy looks good for a drive, I mean, that's often just worth a bet right there. Now, to be clear, there are traders on the other side of these live markets, and they're watching the game too. And sometimes they notice the quarterback looks good, and this is a thing, right? But sometimes they don't. Sometimes the trader on the other side of that game is just putting in their 8 hours, right? And this is where having the ability to have a model to quantitatively say, okay, well, if I assume this guy is as bad as the pregame market thought, my line is here, right? That's the same as the line that I'm being presented with. Therefore, the trader on the other side has not made an adjustment for what we just saw, and I'm going to bet on what we just saw. Or you do that, and you see, oh, wait a second, they already moved it 5%. Sometimes I even think the trader moves it too much, and I bet the other side. Because I'm like, you just moved it 8% on one drive, and, that don't have to be right. So, yeah.
I would think more often than not, certainly without the information, like you said, with that first drive winds up being a good one. In general, most people are sour on or negative towards any backup quarterback coming in. So I would think more often than not, at least it's been my experience in pregame. I've not done much in the live markets, but in pregame, I think they overvalue or undervalue the backup. So if it should be a 3-point move, it might be a 4.5-point move because the market. And it goes back to what I was saying with people that I speak to. And if I like a team and they've got the backup quarterback in, people will almost always tell me, well, don't you know, like the backup quarterback's playing? Like, why would you play this team with a back? As if backup quarterbacks never cover the spread.
Well, for sure. And what I would say about this spot, and there's a ton of them, obviously, especially if you include college football, is 100% you are correct that the market does not often evaluate that situation. It's a high variance spot is what I would call it, right? So it's like, it's the market's taken their best. The market answer is really just an average guess of all the little nerds who take this seriously, which again is not very many.
Right.
There's not very many people who are nerdy enough about this and put enough time into it to actually build these market prices, right? So they've all come to their, sort of rough average consensus, right? They've all bet themselves out. The people who really believe in the backup have all bet their way, and the people who really want to fade the backup have all bet their way, and they don't want any more on it, right? Because there isn't an infinite amount of money in these markets. People are like, okay, I bet my opinion, on to the next game, right? So yeah, and it's a high. Now the problem is, it's easy to convince yourself that you're much better at this. So it's easy to say I'm the quarterback whisperer. I can pick out a good backup quarterback for a bet. I mean, bet. I mean, do it by all means. Try to be that. If you want that to be your specialty as a bettor, and you want to say, I want to be the best backup quarterback analyzer in the world. I mean, you can feed a family of 4 doing that for sure. And the market's big enough to do that. And if you're genuinely good at it, and the thing is that people tend to overestimate how, they forget when it blows up in their face.
What I'm kind of what you're actually you like kind of triggering in my head there though is if you do specialize in something, there's a lot of value in that. If you are like great at MAC basketball or whatever it is, and the ins and outs, there's got to be an advantage to that if you're really looking
100%.
to start out.
200%. This thing, there's this top down thing has kind of taken some prominent people who have kind of made that, and it's
explain top down. Just
so this is the idea of top down is that basically you're just trying to pick off prices, right? There's some idea of some market consensus or best price, that we have now, and then you're basically just trying to, if everybody's selling oranges for 63 cents, well, you want to buy them for 58 and sell them for 64. And if you see any opportunity to sell for 64, you just sell for 64. And if you see any opportunity to buy for 58, you buy for 58. You just without any opinion about the underlying proposition, right? You have no opinion about the underlying value of oranges, no opinion about the underlying likelihood of Vanderbilt to win the football game. You just see somebody's got 27, somebody's got 33, and the most of the people have 30, right? And you're like, well, let me buy 27 and sell 30. So that's what top-down betting is, en masse, right? So people basically have, but the thing is, this is dead obvious, right? This is a dead obvious strategy, right? This is the downside to this. So 100% it works. I don't want to. This is a with caveats, but this is a way to make money sports betting 100%. There's nothing wrong with the logic of it. The problem is it's dead obvious. It's the first thing anyone thinks of. Anyone with a pulse who wants to try to make money at this, it's the very first thing they think of. Wait a second, I could just buy it cheaper and sell it more expensive. Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Yes, you can. And this is, I mean, I don't want to downplay that. This is obviously, that is sports betting skill number one, is buy for as cheap as you can and sell for as expensive as you can, 100%. Okay. But if that's your only trick in your kit, then you are like everybody else, right? There's a million people who have figured out the exact same thing you have, and you're all fighting over the same stuff. There's not a lot of it, right? And there's tools. People built, this guy just sold his company for $160 billion, who basically built a tool to facilitate this, right? Well, I mean, he made more money doing that than most people. Not, again, I'm no shade on his business. Brilliant business. He did great. And the people who buy it probably made a profit. I mean, everybody probably won there except for Fan Kings and Draft Drool. I don't, yeah, it's dead obvious, and there's a ton of competition, and it's just going to be diminishing return over time, right? So I would not suggest, if you want to get involved in sports, I would not go that route personally. I don't see a future in it, really. I think if you want to make that a future, you got to upscale in ways that most people who you got to build software, right? Like no one wants to work; they want the money without working, right? So if you want to actually be good at top-down betting, you need to build a bunch of software on your own that like alerts you to stuff and like brings news to your attention instantaneously, and like it's an arms race for information and for all that stuff, right? And so. No, I would suggest going, you're exactly what you said is, hey, what do you like to watch? What are you interested in? Do you like college basketball the best? Well, then specialize in college basketball. Is there a conference or several, 100%, it's depth first is 100% what I would suggest, right? To get to know, because then you'll learn how it works, right? You'll stop being so intimidated by it, right? Like, let's say MAC basketball better than anyone. I mean, you're going to look at the lines, you're going to be like, wait a second, this is a joke. Don't they know that so-and-so is injured? No, they don't know. They don't know. Only you know. You're the only one who pays attention close enough to know that. So, and once you get that experience of like, wait a second, how are they making this dumb mistake? You have that experience over and over again. You're like, wait a second, these are just people doing their job on the other side of this, doing the job their best they can, but like, this is not magic where these lines come from. And, just if you outwork people and 100% is beatable. Yeah.
It's I guess the less liquid a market would be the opportunity might be there. I mean, the NFL, you're not going to find a lot that other people have not found.
No, this is why I like, if you're dead starting, you're like, hey, I'm really interested in sports betting. I see a long-term future. I'm not just look, if you want to just get your bonus money and play it through and cash out, great, do that, but if you're like, hey, this is something that interests me, I like gambling, I like sports, then 100% I would say find something. Don't pick NFL. I agree. Pick something a little more obscure, but that you like and you want to watch. Watching is important. There's people, I don't watch the game. Okay, that works for them, for what they're doing. But it does not work for what I'm suggesting here. You have to watch the games. You have to know absolutely as much about your little niche that you're interested in as possible. You have to enjoy watching the games. If you don't enjoy watching the games, forget it. Don't do it, right? So you enjoy watching the games, and then start collecting the data. Say, okay, what data do I need? I need, okay, so-and-so is out. Well, I need to know how much that's worth, right? Okay, this guy's an important player. But they moved the line on me. They moved it 3 points. Is 3 points enough? Is it too much? Is it not enough? Now you need to start saying, okay, well, I need to collect data. I need to do some math. The math does not have to be complicated, especially for stuff like that, because again, there's nobody doing complicated math on the other side either. So, but yeah, you have to, and then it builds organically. You have your little Excel spreadsheet, and you got your, idea for how much each of these players are worth, and okay, they moved it 2. I don't think that's enough. Let me bet, right? And then you get your feet wet that way, and maybe you have some success, and someone cuts you off because God forbid you're good at Mac basketball.
Yeah, exactly.
God forbid somebody's winning, betting $300 a game on Mac basketball. But yeah, and that's 100% how I would approach it. If you're new and that's your interest.
When you start, so you're doing NFL Live, and I assume are you doing live with all the sports, all the major sports? It's all live betting
at the moment. I mean, we just ran the short answer is football at the moment is what I'm currently doing, and hopefully taking plenty of time off. It's not football. Yeah.
But before the season starts, I assume you're doing a ton of prep work, because now you need to know what these values are. We've been kind of focused on injuries, but that's a big one. I assume you've got a number for what you think the backup quarterback is worth relative to the starter. Are there other positions that you're looking at in the NFL that are the running backs? Do they need anything?
Everything matters. Everything matters. And the thing is that, and I want to be clear. I mean, my focus is on building. My personal focus is on building models. There's people I work with who do some of the other stuff. I mean, I have facility with all parts of the project, but my personal focus is on modeling how a football game plays out, right? So when you say, what is the work you do? I want to be clear. I personally may or may not do some of this work, but you are correct about the type of work that needs to be done, right? So you have, who's on all the teams, right? You see who's moved teams. A lot of what matters, football's a team sport. A lot of it matters about units. Everyone knows about line play, offensive line, defensive line. Well, that stuff matters, especially when there's cluster injuries, right? Like, if there's an offensive line that was, here or there, all right, they lose one guy. All right. Let's say they lose 3 guys, 4 guys. I mean, that can be a non-linear change. You can't just say, okay, well, this guy's worth a half and this guy's worth a quarter and this guy's worth, it doesn't work like that. Mm-hmm. Non-football, right? So, you have to be aware of, in the off season, who's changed teams, coaching changes, and this is again, I don't know much about the football coaches, but I know people who can tell you every football coach who's ever coached in the last 25 years and their strengths and weaknesses and where they belong, and they should be a this type of coach and not a that type of coach, and they're trying the wrong thing, and anyway, so coaching changes, expectations about how a team might play to strengths or weaknesses based on how the coach approaches the game, all that kind of stuff in the offseason. Yeah, quarterbacks, big deal. Who's the backup? Who are in college? Now there's the portal stuff. Who's transferred in, all that stuff for sure. There's the off season work. It's huge for sure. Yep.
Now, from a betting standpoint, from the amount that you're betting, bankroll management, so to speak, or risk management, are you using a Kelly? How are you guys going about that?
I would say no. I think the people that talk about, I think Kelly is, so the problem with a lot of this, so Kelly, just to be clear, is a mathematical answer to what is the optimal bet type. It's unquestionably correct. It's math. It is perfectly correct. Okay. The issues with Kelly are purely practical, which is, how does sports betting? Well, they play all these games at the same time, So even if the bets are independent, you don't necessarily know what your bankroll is because the bets are resolving at the same time. So if you're making an entire weekend's worth of football bets, during a week, say, you may have 100 bets going into the week. If you're just like, well, Kelly says my bankroll is X and I'm supposed to bet 3.7% on it, well, then you're over betting. Why? Because sometimes you're going to lose all the first bets of the day and your bankroll is, 75% of what it was going into the noon games. Well, guess what? You didn't know that when you made the bet.
Right.
And now you just over bet, right? So I'm not downplaying Kelly. I do think people talk about bankroll management way too much. I think the gambling skill that matters the most is finding edges, understanding where your edges come from, knowing that you're betting with edges, doing so consistently, avoiding bad bets. It's especially in sports, and you alluded to this. Very easy to slip into a good bet can become a bad bet really fast based on that line moving. Okay, I'm betting it at -10. How about -15? How about -8? It just moved. What do I think about -20? It's very easy. And -20 is 2.5% worse. It's like, it's huge, and it's like, it's very easy to kind of accidentally make bets at prices to pay just a little more than you were intending to pay. And all of a sudden that bet is not even close to as good as it was, when you were intending to make it. Right? So that's the thing that can happen. Trying to avoid doing that is a big deal in sport. You don't want to overbet. No one wants to overbet. But a lot of the people that are worried about this, I see people worried about this, a lot of these are beginners. I'm assuming a lot of the people listening to this podcast are kind of beginners. Your bankroll is in the $1,000 range to a couple $1,000. Let's be honest here. If you overbet your bankroll and go bust, go mow some lawn. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but that is not the end of the world if you bust a $3,000 bankroll. If you bust a $10 million bankroll, that might suck, And
right.
So, yeah, but then but the practical bankroll, I think there's too much focus on bankroll. I think for the people who are consuming beginning betting advice, I would say, yeah, don't go crazy and overbet your bankroll. But I think people are too worried about that. I think they're not worried enough about, hey, let's figure out how to actually be good at this, right? And so to me, that's what I would. But yes, you do want to be careful about making 100 bets that all resolve on the same day. You can lose 70 of them, and that can be bad. Yeah.
What I see for sure, what I see a lot now is I was never this way, so I didn't realize it. And as we're building the app, we're noticing more and more people gravitating towards these parlays. And especially like the lottery ticket sort of parlays, everyone's looking for a 6, 7, 8 leg parlay that they could get plus 5,000, plus 10,000 on that parlay, and that seems to be where people are going. And parlays themselves are not necessarily a bad play, are they? If you have an edge, and you have an edge on a straight bet, you seemingly have an edge on a parlay as well. The problem is most people just don't have an edge, and they're magnifying that by parlaying.
Okay, so there's two types of parlay in the modern sports betting universe, right? Type 1 is the type you just described, which is this could be a straight bet. I'm just adding 2 straight bets together and calling it a parlay, right? And I'm getting, plus 260, whatever on it, on my 2-leg parlay. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. If bet A is a good bet and bet B is a good bet, a parlay of bet A and bet B at fair pricing is a better bet. Full stop. That's how parlays work. If bet A was a bad bet and bet B was a bad bet, and you parlay A and B, guess what? You get an even worse bet.
Right.
That's how that works. Okay. So that's how the sort of parlaying straight bets work. There's no magic to it at all. None. It's literally the same as making 2 bets with slightly convoluted bet sizing. Same game parlays. That is sort of the thing that's interesting. Now, or this new or newish, right? So the way same game parlay works, I want to be clear, it's a completely different thing, and it's almost misleading to call it a parlay, right? Because it's not a parlay. Those bets are not offered independently. You can't bet the things in the same game parlay menu independently. Not really, not quite. Like it just works. The pricing is not discernible with math. It is a completely different product. The way same game parlay works is you basically put a bunch of propositions on a card, and then a computer in the cloud somewhere goes and gives you a price, right? Now, how that works is, for the most part, the way that works is the betting company, for the most part, betting company doesn't do it themselves. They have a third party company that has built the software to enable this. That's why you'll often see different sports books with kind of the same product for, there's different, sportsbook A and sportsbook B might have the exact same NFL same game parlay product. Well, it's because it is the same. It's the same company, right? So, but yeah, so there's software, and the way they kind of do it is they have a simulator that simulates the games, which is in my wheelhouse because that's what I do. And so they'll simulate the game a bunch of times, and then when they basically just count up the number of simulations where your parlay would have hit, divide by the total number of simulations, and that's the percentage chance they assign likelihood of your parlay hitting, and then they, divide by 50%.
Right. I was waiting for the point.
So, yeah. So that's how it works, right? So let's say they think let's say they think your parlay is going to hit 10% of the time, right? So fair odds would be like 9-1. Well, they offer you 6-1, 5-1. So I don't know. I mean, they each one is going to give you, and some of them are more generous. Some of them are a lot more generous than others, by the way. There's not a universal amount. There's one company in particular who seems to be very proud of their pricing because they don't juice it that much at all. Yeah. And so that's how it works under the hood. And what I would say so what is the company? So I would say, if you want to bet those, your mindset should be, how do I break the system? Right? I understand how this price gets made. How do I screw them up? How do I turn their little machine around and get it to spit out nonsense so that I can make a profit? Right? That should be the mindset. If you're betting a same game parlay and you're not thinking, how do I break the system that they've presented me with, you're probably losing. Right? If you're just like, oh, I think so and so's going to go off today, yeah, you're dead in the water. Because even if you're right, it's often not enough. Right? Because they're cutting that juice. They're cutting that. They're literally offering you 5-1 on something they think should be 9-1. Right? So like, even if you're right, and their 9-1 is wrong and it should be 7-1, well, they're still only offering you 5-1, so you didn't win, right? So you literally have to think, how do I break this little program? It's like you have to be like a hacker, and like, how do I break this system that they presented me? Well, fortunately, you can. You could break it because you have to think, well, what goes into the system? What does the system have to know to come up with reasonable answers? Lots of ways to break a system. There's an example in the Interception book we give about hockey that I know is a good because somebody politely DM'd me and said, hey, I read your book, and I started crushing hockey same game parlay. I'd never bet it before, but I was like, this is likely to work. So it says, okay, well, let's say you find a same game parlay that lets you bet on goal scorers and assists, like independently, right? So I can bet on over goal scorers, over assists. I can bet on the result of the game. I can bet on whatever, right? So hockey's played in lines. The players play together, right? They play on the same line. Kovalevsky and Tikkanen or whatever, are on the same line. Well, if Kovalevsky scores a goal, there's a good choice Tikkanen is going to get an assist and not, Joe Yokel, who plays on the third line, right? And so these things are correlated. So in the games that go like 9-3, and this is a hockey DFS strategy, same idea with hockey DFS. You're like, okay, well, what happens if this game is 8-2, right? Well, so-and-so is probably going to score 3 goals. Okay, you're going to offer me odds on that. Well, if he scores 3 goals, Tegan is probably going to get at least 2 assists, right? And you start piecing these together. Well, what's the magic? One is, in order for the parlay engine, so you're piecing together things that are by themselves long shot, right? So maybe they price that right, maybe they don't, but they're correlated in this way that they co-happen much more often than the pricing engine. Now, what does the pricing engine have to know? They have to know those two guys are on the same line. The engine has to know who's on every line in the NHL every single night in order to get that right. And they have to know who plays on the power play lines, right? That's the most important. Who's on the power play line, right? So you've got, this team's got a power play line, right? And these two guys are on the same, they're both on the second line, let's say, on their normal game, and they're both on the power play line, and the team, let's say the team kind of has a high team total today, like, kind of supposed to score a bunch of goals anyway, right? And then you're like, well, maybe they score 8 today, and let me make the parlay that they score 8, and this guy gets 3 goals and this guy gets 2 assists, and I bet over the all team total goals line. All of a sudden, they're offering me a bazillion to 1 because I broke their simulator, right? That's how you beat same game parlays. You do that. And this logic applies in every sport. So if you wanna bet same game parlays, you should be thinking like that. Otherwise, I would not.
You basically you have to understand correlations. Basically, you have to understand.
Yeah, and you have to understand correlations, and you have to understand how the machine works on the other side.
Right.
You have to say, what did they have to get right to get this pricing right? What work did they have to do every day if they want to get this right? The harder that work sounds, the better.
Yes, I know a group of people who were doing that, and very similar to what you're talking about in baseball. And hockey and baseball are very correlated in themselves. But they were doing that with multiple hit props for all 9 players in a game. It had to be a total of over whatever number, team total, and they were playing every starter in the lineup to get multiple hits, and then playing it in a multitude of parlays. And of course, they're not going to win very often. But when they did, they wound up taking.
But you're breaking the system
that's right.
Because someone on the other side has to get that right, and it's hard to get right. Why? Because what happened for a bunch of guys to get multiple hits? Well, the pitcher had a terrible day, or whatever, or whatever. There was some breakdown, and it's just not in their model.
Right.
Like, a thing that is not in their model happened, and things that are not in their model happen in sports.
That's right.
And and they mispriced it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, these guys, and they took them for 7 figures. The book when it eventually hit.
That is exactly how you do it.
Yes,
that is exactly.
You just need the bankroll to withstand, because it's not going to happen very often. But when it does, you break them. So yeah, that's that. I think that's a great takeaway. I think it's a good way to end on a positive, that there's plenty out there for those who are motivated.
Plenty out there.
Yeah, you've got to be motivated. You've got to have you've got to be willing. Listen, I always said it's the most difficult way to make an easy living is gambling of all sorts, poker, sports betting, whatever it is, DFS. It's a lot more work, but if you're into it, if you like the data and you like the sport, it becomes enjoyable, and it's doing something that you enjoy to do, right? Yeah. Well, I love doing the podcast, because I get to bring people on who are a whole lot smarter than me, and I get to learn a little something. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm hoping we can do it again. I think there's a million topics that we can talk about that we didn't have time to really get into today, and maybe talk a little bit more about some of your writings and your books. But it was a pleasure, and thank you so much for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was great. This was a lot of fun.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed.
Yep. Thanks.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this content.